All right, Shalom. First off, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh by Hashem Shah. Double honors to the apostles of Great Millstone. And it's sincere Shalom to all the Akim out here that's doing and pushing the work, the truth, and the sincerity. I want to go into this lesson, about how the Lord, Yahweh by Hashem Shah, which Yahweh is the Father, the one who the world ignorantly calls Jehovah, you know, by Hashem stands for in the name of, and Yahweh Shah is the Son, which the world ignorantly calls Jesus Christ, so it's Yahweh Bashem Yahweh Shah, and basically Yahweh Bashem Yahweh Shah, the Father in the name of the Son, requires a sacrifice, I'm going to start off with the scripture, Romans 12:1. I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that ye present your bodies a living sacrifice. Okay? When you come into this truth, you have to present your body as a living sacrifice, whether it's going out in the cold, in the heat, or whatever else is the case, standing there holding post, being out there edifying, you know, we're all a part of the body, and it's all about edifying, you know. So when you present your body as a living sacrifice, that's a part of what the Lord requires. You know, it says, "Wholly acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service," and that's what we're doing. You come into this truth, we're basically servants. Our service is towards Yahweh Bashem Yahweh Shah. Back in the day, in ancient days, we had, the Lord required a sacrifice. Well, today, we are the sacrifice, that the Lord wants, and to be honest, when you look at the everything in a nutshell, the Lord, he sacrificed, he required his own son to sacrifice himself, man, in order for us to get back to the Lord, you know. But as I said, the Lord requires a sacrifice, and we have to present our bodies as a living sacrifice unto the Lord, you know. So when you come into this truth, you might have been into doing certain things a certain way, you know. Well, you gotta let all that go, you know. You gotta let your pride go. You gotta sacrifice. You gotta make sacrifices, man. Money, you know, your family sometimes, you know, do a video for the Lord, you know, and it's a simple thing, man. Guys act like it's a hard concept to get, but it's really simple, man. You know, it says, and be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, that ye may prove what is good and acceptable and perfect will of God. You know, and when you come into this truth, man, like I said, you're not supposed to be conformed. What is the scripture say? You're not supposed to be conformed to this world. You know, your whole mindset when you come into this thing is supposed to be changed. You know, is a new creature of Yahweh Bashem Yahweh Shah. You know, this is Psalms 116:12. It says, "What shall I render unto the Lord for all his benefits towards me?" You know, and when you look at it, what what is going out there in the winter, you know, or the cold, or doing videos, or putting up money, sending tights up to the the apostles, the elders, you know, losing your pride, you know, and what are you going to do? What are you going to give to the Lord, man? In order for for all the benefits that the Lord is going to give you, you know, you see, the Lord has a lot of promises that's that he's given or promised, and he's not slack concerning his promise, man. That's what a lot of people got to realize. But the Lord made a lot of promises, man, to his men, to his servants, man. You do his work, the Lord is going to look out for you in this life and in the next life. You know, it says, "What should I render?" So when you look at all the things that the Lord is going to give you, everlasting life, whatever woman you want, you know, the as long as it's not, as long as it's in righteousness, you know, because you got guys that want other men, women, you know, coveting, being wicked, you know. So what are you going to do? Are you going to be righteous in order to or try to be righteous, you know, in order to gain the Lord's righteousness, man? Or are you going to establish your own righteousness, you know, and think that the Lord is just going to bless you that way? No, you got to be down with the program, man. You know, the Lord spoke, you know, and that's what he said we got to do, you know. So when you look at all the benefits that's coming towards us, at the end of the day, by this being a living sacrifice, we're not supposed to be doing this for the sake of a reward, you know. But we know that reward is going to come. You know, if it don't happen, man, then so be it. You know, America going to get destroyed. You know, Esau going into slavery, and that's a blessing in itself, right there, man. You know, it says, "I will take the cup of salvation and call upon the name of the Lord." You know, and the Lord requires us to call upon His name, man. You know, it says, "I will pay my vows unto the Lord." The Lord requires you to you make a vow unto the Lord when you come into this. He requires you to pay them vows. You know, it says, "Now in the presence of all His people," and one of them vows is coming out during the commandments, man. The Lord called you out of your life, or whatever you was going through, you know, whatever, because you know we was wicked before we came into this truth. And the Lord called us out of that life, man. And now we got a vow to repay the Lord, man. Because He's really doing us a favor, man. He could have made anybody, he could have called anybody, man. You know? But for us to have this chance, you know, like that's special, man. You know, it says in the presence of all people, man. We supposed to let that be known and let it be shown, man. You know, it says precious in the sight of the Lord, Yahweh Bashim Yahushua, is the death of His saints. You know, so if you go out there and you die in the cold, you know, doing the work of the Lord, because you could die anywhere, man. You could die at any point in any given time, man. You know, walking down the street, fall down, bust your head. You know, walking down the steps at your own house. You could not wake up. You know, you could die at any time, man. Death is like a shadow, man. You know, and it's everywhere we go, man. You know, but it says, "Precious in the sight of the Lord is the death of His saints," and that's, you know, living, presenting our body as a living sacrifice. You know, unto the Lord. You know, this is First Peter 2:5. It says, "Ye also, as lively stones, are built up a spiritual house and holy priesthood." You know, so when you come into this, man, this is a spiritual thing, man. You know, we delivering the word and telling people, we bring it, the hopeful elect, to the Lord. You know, it says to offer up spiritual sacrifices. Okay, and a lot of people, they don't want to let go or offer up these spiritual sacrifices because they're too carnal. You got guys that want to hold on to money, or guys that don't want to go out. You know, guys that want to hold on to their families. You know, but the Lord requires those spiritual sacrifices. It says acceptable to God by Yahweh Shah. You know, so the thing is, man, this this thing, man, the Lord requires a sacrifice. You know, and you know that's pretty much the point, man. You know, but with that, man, I hope that you guys was edified. You know, I could go on and probably do a part 2 on this. You know, but with that, man, I want to say shalom.